12 years of marriage had its own scent. For Dora Robbins, it was the clean, sterile smell of unscented laundry detergent, freshly brewed coffee, and the faint, woodsy aroma of her husband's aftershave. But recently, a new note had crept in. Something floral and sweet, a ghost of a fragrance that clung to his shirts when he came home late from client dinners. It was the scent of a secret, and it was slowly poisoning the air in their quiet, perfectly ordered Denver home. The silence between them wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy, suffocating. And tonight, a single line item on their credit card statement gave that silence a name. The Halcyon Hotel, Cherry Creek. A place for lovers. A place they hadn't been together in years. The autumn sun bled through the great room windows, casting long, searching fingers of light across the polished hardwood floors. From her armchair, Dora watched the dust motes dance in the golden shafts, each a tiny, glittering world of its own. It was a beautiful home in the sprawling, manicured suburbs south of Denver, a testament to her husband's success. Rodolfo Allen had a talent for turning empty plots of land into thriving communities, for selling a dream of Rocky Mountain living. He had sold that dream to her as well, 12 years ago. Their life was a portrait of quiet success. A home with cathedral ceilings, a German SUV in the 3-car garage, and a marriage that from the outside looked as solid as the granite countertops in their kitchen. But inside, it was hollowed out. The structure remained, but the substance had long since eroded, washed away by a current of unspoken resentments and diverging paths. Rodolfo walked in, tie already loosened, the crisp lines of his custom suit softened by a long day. "Long one," he announced to the room, not specifically to her. His gaze was already on his phone, thumbs flying across the screen. "How was the meeting with the city planners?" Dora asked, her voice soft, easily absorbed by the cavernous space. "Fine. Bureaucratic nonsense. You know how it is." He tossed his briefcase onto the leather sofa, the sound startling in the stillness. He didn't ask about her day. He hadn't, not really, in years. Her days were a predictable rhythm, managing the household, volunteering at the library, tending to the garden that bloomed with a vibrancy their marriage lacked. She was a fixture in his life, as reliable and unnoticed as the automatic sprinkler system. She watched him move to the wet bar, the clink of ice in a heavy crystal glass a familiar evening ritual. It was in these small moments that the distance felt most acute. They were two people sharing a space, moving in parallel orbits that never quite intersected. The easy laughter of their early years had faded into polite inquiries. The passionate debates had been replaced by a carefully negotiated peace. The suspicion had started subtly. A phone call he took on the patio, his back turned to the glass doors. The sudden need for late-night meetings that stretched into the early hours. And the scent, that cloying, unfamiliar perfume. Tonight it was there again, a faint whisper on the collar of his shirt as he leaned over to grab the remote. Later, after he had retreated to his home office, she sat at the kitchen island with their finances. It was a task she handled meticulously, a small domain of control in a life that felt increasingly rudderless. She scrolled through the credit card statement online, her eyes scanning the familiar charges. Whole Foods, the dry cleaner, his monthly subscription for a golf magazine. And then she saw it. The Halcyon Hotel, Cherry Creek, 478,050. Her breath caught in her chest. Cherry Creek, the upscale, boutique-filled neighborhood, was their special occasion spot. Anniversaries, birthdays. But the charge was from last Tuesday, a night he'd said he was stuck in a marathon zoning session in Low-High. He'd come home after midnight, smelling of exhaustion and that sweet, foreign perfume. She stared at the line on the screen, the pixels glowing in the dim light. It wasn't a scream or a shatter. It was a low, humming dread that started in the pit of her stomach and spread through her veins, cold and slow. The portrait of their life was a lie. The foundation she had built her world upon was nothing but sand. The man sleeping in the room down the hall, the man whose rhythms and habits she knew better than her own, was a stranger. And he was breaking her heart in the quietest, most brutal way imaginable. She closed the laptop, the soft click echoing the sound of a door shutting somewhere deep inside her. The next morning, the air was crystalline. The Front Range Mountains a jagged, purple silhouette against the dawn sky. Dora waited until Rodolfo had finished his coffee, standing by the island, scrolling through news headlines on his tablet. The scene was so painfully normal, it felt like a parody. She held her own mug, the warmth of the ceramic a small, grounding comfort against the tremor in her hands. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't throw an accusation like a stone. She simply asked the question that had kept her awake all night, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Rodolfo," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Why was there a charge for the Halcyon Hotel on our credit card?" He didn't look up immediately. For a moment, she thought he hadn't heard her. Then, his thumb stopped its relentless scrolling. He slowly lowered the tablet, his expression not one of guilt or panic, but of mild annoyance, as if she had just pointed out a smudge on a window. It was a business meeting, a potential investor from out of town. "We needed a quiet place to talk," he said, his tone smooth, practiced. "At a hotel in Cherry Creek, at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night?" The trembling in her voice was more pronounced now. A betrayer. He finally met her eyes, and what she saw there broke her more than the affair itself. There was no remorse, only a cool, dismissive pity. He sighed, a put-upon sound, and leaned back against the counter. "Dora, let's not do this," he said, his voice dropping into a register of condescending reason. "Let's not pretend we haven't been drifting apart for years." The gaslighting began, not with a torrent, but with a slow, deliberate drip of poison. "I work 60-hour weeks to provide this life for us. I'm out there, every day, fighting to build something. And I come home and... what? It's quiet. It's the same. You're the same." Each word was a carefully placed knife. "You used to have passions, Dora. You used to paint. You used to read things besides book club novels. What happened to that woman?" Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. She had given up her small art studio to make space for his home gym. She had set aside her own ambitions to support his, hosting dinner parties for his clients, managing their lives so he could focus on his empire. She had done it willingly, out of love. He was now reframing her sacrifice as a personal failing. "I supported you," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate, feeble. "Supporting me isn't the same as inspiring me," he countered, his voice still calm, which made it all the more cruel. "I need more. I need energy. Ambition. Kathleen, she's ambitious. She understands the world I live in." He said the name, Kathleen, so easily. It was a name she didn't know, yet it felt like it had been living in their house for months, a ghost at their dinner table. Dora felt the floor drop out from under her. The betrayal wasn't just the act of infidelity. It was this cold, clinical dissection of her worth. It was the realization that in his eyes she had become obsolete, a piece of comfortable furniture he no longer found interesting. The 12 years they had built, the shared jokes, the quiet moments, the vows they had made. He had rewritten all of it into a narrative of her inadequacy. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw a stranger. The charming, driven man she had fallen in love with was gone, replaced by this hollow effigy of success, a man whose heart was so small it had no room for loyalty or grace. "So this is my fault," she stated, the question hanging dead in the air between them. He didn't answer. He just gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug, as if to say, "If the shoe fits." He picked up his tablet, his attention already moving on. The conversation, for him, was over. For Dora, the world had just ended. It hadn't ended with a bang, but with the quiet, shattering sound of her own heart breaking. There was no grand exit, no slamming doors or tearful goodbyes. There was only the quiet, methodical packing of a single duffel bag, a few changes of clothes, her toiletries, the dog-eared copy of a novel she'd been reading, and the small, velvet-covered box that held her mother's locket, the only thing she had from a woman she'd never known. She was an adopted child, her history a sealed book. Her only family had been Rodolfo, and his family had always kept her at a polite but firm distance. She was truly, utterly alone. She looked around the cavernous master bedroom at the life she was leaving behind. The abstract painting above the bed they had picked out together, his watch collection glinting under the recessed lighting. It all felt like a movie set, beautiful and impersonal. She didn't belong here anymore. Perhaps she never had. She wrote no note. A note would imply there was something left to say, some explanation required. His calm cruelty had said it all. She took her own car, a modest sedan dwarfed by his SUV in the garage, and drove away as the morning sun climbed higher, casting a harsh, unforgiving light on the perfect lawns of their neighborhood. She drove east, away from the mountains, into the flat, anonymous sprawl of the city's edge. She found a motel on a forgotten stretch of Colfax Avenue, a place of peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that promised color TV. It was the antithesis of her life with Rodolfo, and for that reason, it felt safe. She paid for a week in cash, using a name she plucked from a street sign. Invisibility was a balm. The days blurred into a haze of grief. She lay on the stiff, starched sheets, the hum of the mini-fridge her only companion. The vibrant, confident woman Rodolfo accused her of losing felt like a phantom, a story about someone else. All she felt was a profound, crushing emptiness. The man she had dedicated her life to had deemed her worthless, and in the silence of that motel room, she started to believe him. A week later, a persistent, low-grade nausea began to plague her. She dismissed it as stress until it was accompanied by a dizzy spell in the motel parking lot. With a sense of grim duty, she walked to a nearby pharmacy and bought a pregnancy test. Back in the sterile, fluorescent-lit bathroom, she watched the 2 pink lines appear, stark and undeniable. Pregnant. The word echoed in the small space, a soundless scream. This should have been a moment of joy. They had tried, intermittently, and without success, for years. Rodolfo had eventually declared it was probably for the best. A child would complicate his career. Now, a child was coming. A child conceived in a lie. A tiny anchor tying her to the man who had just set her adrift. The despair was absolute. She was 38, alone, with no job, no family to turn to, and a baby on the way. She slid down the cool tile wall and wept, not for her broken marriage, but for the terrifying, uncertain future of the life growing inside her. It was in this moment of pure desolation, sitting on the floor of a cheap motel bathroom, that her life pivoted on an axis she never knew existed. The motel manager knocked on her door, holding a crisp, imposing envelope. "Certified letter for a Dora Robbins," he said, looking her up and down with weary curiosity. Had to sign for it. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Rodolfo. It had to be divorce papers. He was moving with ruthless efficiency. Her hands trembled as she took the envelope. But the return address wasn't a local law firm. It was from a prestigious, old-money firm downtown. Sterling, Price, and Associates. She tore it open. The letter was dense with legal jargon, but a few words leapt out at her. Estate of Marcus Sterling. Biological grandfather. Sole surviving heir. Immediate and confidential meeting required. Marcus Sterling. The name meant nothing to her. She had no grandfather. Her adoption files were sealed. This had to be a mistake. Yet the letter contained her full legal name and date of birth, details no stranger could foreknow. She read it again, the formal, authoritative words a stark contrast to her desolate reality. It felt like a message from another universe, a lifeline thrown into the abyss. With nothing left to lose, she picked up her phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the page. The offices of Sterling, Price and Associates occupied the top 2 floors of a downtown skyscraper. The view from the waiting room was a panoramic sweep of the city, with the snow-dusted peaks of the Rockies looming in the distance. The world outside was vast and indifferent, a stark contrast to the hushed, mahogany-panelled reverence of the office. It was a world of old money and quiet power, and Dora felt like an intruder in borrowed clothes. A man in his late 60s with a kind, weary face and a perfectly tailored suit greeted her. "Mrs. Allen? I am Arthur Vance. I was your grandfather's personal attorney and oldest friend." He led her into a corner office lined with leather-bound books. On the wall hung a single, striking oil portrait of a man with piercing blue eyes, a strong jaw, and an expression of profound intelligence and deep-seated melancholy. He looked both powerful and deeply lonely. "That is Marcus Sterling," Arthur said, noticing her gaze. Dora sat, her hands clutching her purse in her lap. "Mr. Vance, I believe there's been a mistake. I was adopted. I don't have any biological family." Arthur gave her a sad, knowing smile. "That is what you were led to believe, my dear. And for good reason at the time. Your story is complicated." For the next hour, Arthur Vance unspooled a history that felt like a fiction novel. Her mother, Eleanor Sterling, was Marcus's only child, a brilliant but rebellious young woman. In the late 1970s, she had a secret, passionate affair with a married man from a rival, equally powerful Denver family. When she became pregnant, the scandal threatened to destroy not just 2 prominent families, but the very fabric of the city's social and economic elite. A deal was struck in the shadows of offices like this one. To protect everyone involved, Eleanor was sent away to a private clinic in California. She gave birth to a daughter, whom she named Theodora, meaning gift of God. Then, through a discreet, iron-clad private adoption, the baby was given to a loving, middle-class couple who were told the mother was a young student who couldn't cope. The records were sealed, and Eleanor returned to Denver, heartbroken but compliant, eventually marrying a man of her father's choosing and living a quiet, unfulfilled life until her death from cancer a decade ago. "Marcus never forgave himself," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. He respected Eleanor's sacrifice, but it haunted him. He spent years trying to find you, but the adoption was a fortress. It wasn't until a recent change in state law and some very discreet work by our investigators that we located you, just a few months before he passed. He slid a thick portfolio across the polished desk. He amended his will immediately. "Dora, or Theodora, as is your birth name, you are the sole heir to his entire estate." Dora stared at him, numb. His estate? Marcus was the founder and majority shareholder of the Sterling Price Corporation, Arthur explained gently. It is one of the largest and most influential energy conglomerates in the western United States. The words didn't compute. Energy conglomerate. Sole heir. It was too vast, too abstract. She thought of the peeling paint at the motel, the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test. Her world had shrunk to the size of her own despair, and now this man was telling her she had inherited an empire. He wanted to meet you, Arthur continued, his eyes full of regret. He was gathering the courage to disrupt your life. He didn't want to cause you pain. But his heart gave out before he could. He pushed another, smaller envelope toward her. Inside was a handwritten letter, the script shaky but elegant. My dearest Theodora, it began. I do not know if I will ever have the courage to hand you this myself. To know you have been in this world, so close, and that I have been a coward, is my life's greatest regret. Your mother was a star that burned too brightly. I failed to protect her spirit, and in doing so, I failed you. This legacy is not a gift to replace what you have lost. It is a tool. I hope you will use it to build a life of your own design, a life of strength and independence, a life your mother would have been proud of. Forgive an old man's foolishness. Your grandfather, Marcus. A single tear traced a path down Dora's cheek. It wasn't a tear of grief for a man she never knew, but a tear of profound, shattering recognition. That feeling of being an outsider, of never quite belonging, of a deep, unnamed loneliness. It was an inheritance. She wasn't just Dora Robbins, the discarded wife. She was Theodora Sterling, the secret granddaughter, a woman with a history as vast and complicated as the mountains outside the window. And in the wreckage of her old life, a new one was, terrifyingly, beginning. The transformation from Dora Robbins to Theodora Sterling wasn't instantaneous. It was a slow, cautious process, like a patient learning to walk again after a long illness. Her first act was to legally reclaim her birth name. Theodora. It felt foreign on her tongue, but it was a shield, a demarcation between the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. She moved out of the motel and into a discreet, furnished apartment in a historic building her grandfather had owned in Capitol Hill. It was elegant, but not ostentatious, a quiet space to think and to grieve the life she'd lost, even as she grappled with the one she'd found. The first board meeting at Sterling Price was terrifying. She walked into a room of 12 men, all of them older, exuding an aura of tailored suits and effortless authority. They looked at her with a mixture of curiosity, pity, and thinly veiled skepticism. To them, she was an anomaly, a secret pulled from a hat, a woman who had, until a month ago, been managing a suburban household. She said little, listening intently, her quiet nature now a strategic asset. She absorbed the acronyms, the financial projections, the subtle power plays between an ambitious CFO and a veteran COO. It was after that first meeting that she was formally introduced to Raoul Ahrens. He was the CEO of Ahrens Energy, a major rival, but he had requested a private meeting. He was a man in his late 40s, with salt and pepper hair and the calm, steady eyes of someone who was accustomed to high stakes and immense pressure. He was nothing like Rodolfo. Where Rodolfo's charisma was a performance, Raoul's presence was a quiet, solid fact. "Ms. Sterling," he said, his voice a low baritone. "I wanted to offer my condolences. Your grandfather was a formidable opponent, but he was a man of integrity. A rare thing in our business." "Thank you, Mr. Ahrens," Theodora replied, her voice steady. "Marcus spoke of you," Raoul said, his gaze direct, discerning. in his last months. He said he had found his true north. He was worried about you stepping into this world. It can be predatory. He paused, studying her. He also said you had a mind like a steel trap, but a heart you kept hidden. He believed you had his instinct. This was the first time someone had spoken of her with an expectation of strength, not fragility. It was a revelation. "I don't know anything about running a corporation," she admitted, the confession costing her. "You don't need to know everything at once," Raoul said. "You need to know how to listen, and you need to know who to trust. The former, I can see you've already mastered. The latter is the hard part." In the weeks that followed, Raoul became an unlikely guide. He never offered direct business advice that would compromise his own company, but he mentored her in the abstract. He'd send her articles on market trends, recommend books on corporate governance, and meet her for coffee at a small, out-of-the-way cafe where he'd explain the unwritten rules of power. He spoke of her grandfather's business philosophy, of building for the long term, not for the quick profit. He saw what Rodolfo had never bothered to look for, the sharp, analytical mind behind her quiet demeanor. She had managed Rodolfo's complex social and financial life for over a decade with quiet efficiency. She understood nuance, observed details, and possessed a deep, untapped well of resilience. Under Raoul's tutelage, and with Arthur Vance's legal guidance, Theodora began to find her footing. She started asking questions in board meetings, quiet, insightful questions that often cut to the heart of an issue, disarming the more verbose executives. She spent her evenings not watching television, but poring over financial reports and project proposals, her pregnancy a secret, motivating drive. This empire would not be just for her. It would be for her child. She was slowly shedding the skin of Dora, the underestimated wife. In its place, Theodora was emerging, a woman who was discovering that her quietness was not a weakness, but a source of immense, overlooked strength. She was still nervous, still learning, but for the first time in her life, she felt the solid ground of her own potential beneath her feet. While Theodora was quietly ascending, Rodolfo Allen was in a slow, agonizing free fall. His real estate empire, which had always seemed so robust, was in truth a house of cards built on risky leverage and the sheer force of his charismatic personality. He was a master of the pitch, of selling a vision. But with the market tightening, his lenders were getting nervous. They wanted more than charm. They wanted solid returns, and Rodolfo's projects were overextended and undercapitalized. The disappearance of his wife was a strange, nagging annoyance. He'd filed a missing persons report, more for appearances than out of genuine concern. He told himself she'd had some kind of midlife breakdown and would eventually turn up at a sister's house he'd forgotten she had. In her absence, Kathleen Hall had moved into the sterile suburban home, her bright, ambitious presence a temporary balm for his fraying ego. She wore Dora's robes and used her kitchen, a conqueror in a land she didn't realize was sinking into the sea. Rodolfo's desperation led him to the annual Denver Foundation Gala, the city's premier charity event. It was a convergence of old and new money, a place where deals were made over champagne and canapes. He needed to find a new investor, a lifeline. Kathleen was on his arm, dazzling in a rented designer gown, playing the part of the supportive, glamorous partner. The event was held at the city's botanical gardens, the main hall, a glass conservatory filled with exotic plants, and the murmur of powerful people. Rodolfo worked the room, his smile bright, his handshake firm, betraying none of the panic churning in his gut. He was in conversation with a banking executive when a sudden hush fell over a nearby group. A new arrival was making her way through the crowd, flanked by the venerable Arthur Vance. Rodolfo glanced over, irritated by the distraction, and then he froze. The woman was Dora. But it wasn't. The hair was the same warm brown, but styled in an elegant, sophisticated way. The simple practical clothes he was used to had been replaced by a deep emerald gown that shimmered under the lights, her shoulders bare, a delicate diamond necklace, her mother's at her throat. She moved with a poise and confidence he had never seen before. She wasn't hiding in the corners. She was the center of gravity. His brain struggled to reconcile the image. It was his quiet, uninspiring wife, transformed. He saw the city's mayor approach her, shake her hand with deference. He saw heads of industry leaning in to speak with her. "Who is that?" Kathleen whispered, her voice laced with envy. "She's stunning." Before Rodolfo could answer, the host of the event, a local philanthropist, stepped to the microphone on the small stage. "And we are especially honored tonight," the man boomed, his voice echoing through the conservatory, "to welcome the new chairwoman of the Sterling Price Corporation, who is graciously continuing her grandfather, Marcus Sterling's legacy of generosity. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Theodora Sterling." A wave of polite, enthusiastic applause filled the room. Theodora Sterling. The name hit Rodolfo like a physical blow. Sterling Price, the energy giant, the old money titan. He stared, his champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. The quiet librarian volunteer, the woman he had discarded for being uninteresting, was the heiress to one of the largest fortunes in the state. He felt the blood drain from his face. The humiliation was swift and absolute. Every dismissive word he had ever said to her, every condescending glance, every secret lie, it all came rushing back to him in a tidal wave of horrified clarity. He had been married to an empress and had been utterly blind to it. Kathleen gripped his arm, her nails digging in. "Rodolfo, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." He couldn't speak. He could only watch as his wife, a woman he now realized he had never known at all, took her place at the center of a world he had only ever dreamed of entering. The gala was a turning point for Kathleen Hall. She had watched the blood drain from Rodolfo's face, had felt the tremor in his arm as he stared at Theodora Sterling. In that moment, she understood that her dream of a secure, wealthy life was built on a foundation of lies. Not Dora's, but Rodolfo's. The confident millionaire she had attached herself to was a fraud, a man whose success was as hollow as his promises. Her ambition, born from a childhood of scraping by in a forgotten rural town, turned to raw, panicked desperation. Rodolfo was her escape route, her one shot at leaving behind the constant worry and pinched finances of her past. Now, that route was closing. In the days that followed, as Rodolfo grew more frantic and withdrawn, his phone ringing with angry calls from creditors, Kathleen started to dig. She wasn't looking for revenge on Theodora. She was looking for leverage, for some piece of information she could use to salvage her own situation. She hired a cheap private investigator, feeding him the few details she knew about the woman formerly known as Dora Robbins. The investigator's report was not the scandal she had hoped for. It was a quiet tragedy. He uncovered the sealed adoption records, the story of Eleanor Sterling, the secret affair, and the impossible choice made 40 years ago. He found photos of Eleanor, a beautiful, sad-eyed woman, trapped in a gilded cage. He detailed her loveless marriage and her early death. Reading the report in the sterile grandeur of Rodolfo's home, Kathleen felt a chill of recognition. She saw in Eleanor a reflection of her own potential fate, a woman whose life was defined and constrained by a powerful man. She had seen Rodolfo as a savior, but now she saw him for what he was, a user. He had used Dora's quiet stability, and now he was using her own ambition and youth as a temporary ego boost. Once she was no longer useful, he would discard her too. Her desperation soured into a bitter self-awareness. She confronted Rodolfo one evening as he stared blankly at a stack of overdue invoices. "She was adopted, you know," Kathleen said, her voice flat. Her mother was an heiress who got pregnant by the wrong man. They hid her away, made her give up the baby to avoid a scandal. Rodolfo looked up, his eyes vacant. "What does that matter? It matters because you spent 12 years married to a woman who was completely alone in the world, and you never even saw it," Kathleen shot back, her voice rising with a frustration that was as much for herself as for Dora. "You saw a quiet wife. You didn't see a survivor. You have no idea who she is." "And you do?" he sneered, his own self-pity making him cruel. "I know that she's everything I thought I wanted to be. But she got there through tragedy, not manipulation," Kathleen said, the words a confession. "And I'm starting to think I hitched my wagon to a falling star." The fight that followed was ugly and final. The illusion of their passionate affair shattered, revealing the transactional nature beneath. She saw his weakness, his blustering ego, and he saw her raw, grasping ambition. There was no love there, only mutual use. Kathleen packed her bags that night. As she left the soulless suburban house, she felt not triumph, but a profound emptiness. She hadn't won. In a way, she had lost more than Rodolfo. He was losing money and status. She was losing the last vestiges of the person she had hoped to become. She had tried to escape her past by latching on to someone else's future, only to find herself more lost and alone than when she had started. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she knew it had to be her own. The winter snows began to blanket Denver, muffling the city in a quiet white. Inside the warm, wood-paneled boardroom of Sterling Price, Theodora was commanding a different kind of hush. Her pregnancy was now a visible, gentle curve beneath her tailored jackets, a quiet announcement of the future she was building. The board, once skeptical, now watched her with a growing respect. She was not her grandfather. She lacked his booming authority, but she possessed his uncanny ability to see the whole board, to think 5 moves ahead. Her quiet confidence was bolstered by Raoul Ahrens. Their weekly coffees had evolved into a trusted alliance. He never told her what to do, but he taught her how to think like a CEO, how to weigh risk and opportunity, and how to separate emotion from strategy. The opportunity came in the form of a portfolio labeled Aspen Ridge Development. It was a prime tract of land nestled in the foothills west of the city, fully zoned for a luxury residential community. The current owner, Allen Development LLC, was in default with its primary lender. The bank was looking for a discreet, all-cash buyer to take the asset off its hands before it went to a messy public auction. Theodora read the file, her expression unreadable. This was Rodolfo's crown jewel, the project he had sunk everything into, the one he was counting on to save him from ruin. Her CFO, a slick man named Peterson, who had initially underestimated her, presented the deal with enthusiasm. "It's a steal, Miss Sterling. The land is worth at least 30% more than the debt owed. It's a sound, strategic acquisition for our real estate division. A guaranteed profit." He was watching her, looking for a flicker of vengeful satisfaction. He saw none. Theodora turned to her team. "What are the infrastructure challenges? Water rights in that region are complex. What's the timeline for municipal approvals on utility hookups?" For an hour, she peppered them with calm, intelligent questions. She spoke not of Rodolfo, but of market viability, long-term growth, and corporate responsibility. She was treating it as what it was, a business decision. Later that day, she met with Raoul in her office. The city lights glittered below as evening fell. "The Aspen Ridge portfolio landed on my desk this morning," she said simply, watching his reaction. He nodded slowly. I assumed it would. The banks move quickly when they smell blood in the water. He looked at her, his expression serious. This is a test, Theodora. Not of your business acumen, but of your character. You have the power to crush him. It's a good investment, she said, her voice even. The numbers work. It aligns with our diversification strategy. I have no doubt about that, Raoul replied. But motives matter. Are you buying it to build something or to destroy someone? Theodora walked to the window, placing a hand on her stomach. She thought of the woman she had been, the wife who had tried so hard to please a man who could not be pleased. She thought of his cold, dismissive words, the quiet shattering of her world. A part of her, a wounded, angry part, wanted him to feel that same devastation. But then she thought of her grandfather's letter. Use it to build a life of your own design. Revenge wasn't building, it was demolition. It would tie her to Rodolfo, to the past, with chains of bitterness. I'm buying it, she said, turning back to Raoul, her eyes clear and resolved. Because it's the right move for this company. What happens to Rodolfo Allen is a consequence of his own choices, not mine. Raoul held her gaze for a long moment, and then a slow, respectful smile touched his lips. He saw it then, the steel her grandfather had spoken of. The next day, Theodora authorized the acquisition. The deal was signed, a quiet transaction between two massive corporations. There was no triumphant press release, no gloating. It was a calculated, dispassionate move. But the effect was the same. With the stroke of a pen, Theodora Sterling had taken possession of her husband's last hope. The power imbalance had not just flipped, it had been completely and irrevocably reversed. A week after the sale of Aspen Ridge was finalized, Rodolfo's secretary called. He requested a meeting, not as a businessman, but simply as her husband. The divorce proceedings were underway, a sterile exchange between lawyers. But this, he insisted, had to be face-to-face. Theodora agreed. She chose her office as the location. This was her ground, her domain. He arrived looking like a ghost of his former self. His expensive suit hung on a frame that had lost weight. The charismatic confidence in his eyes had been replaced by a haunted, bewildered exhaustion. He was no longer the titan of real estate. He was just a man who had lost his way. He didn't sit in one of the plush visitors' chairs. He stood in the middle of the vast office, looking small against the backdrop of the city skyline. I didn't come here to ask for money, he began, his voice raspy. I know that's gone. Everything's gone. He looked at her, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. I came to ask, how? How did you become this? He gestured around the office, at the trappings of power, at her. Theodora remained seated behind her large, uncluttered desk, her hands resting on her pregnant belly. She felt a surprising lack of animosity. All the anger had burned away, leaving behind only a quiet, sad clarity. This person, she said, her voice calm and steady, was always here, Rodolfo. You just never bothered to look. I don't understand, he said, shaking his head. The woman I was married to, she was quiet. She was content. The woman you were married to, Theodora corrected gently, was hiding. She was trying so hard to be the person she thought you wanted her to be that she forgot who she actually was. She made herself small to leave more room for your ego. The truth of her words hung in the air, stark and undeniable. I loved you, he whispered, the words sounding like a desperate plea, an attempt to reclaim a past that no longer existed. I know you did, she replied, in your way. You loved the idea of me, the supportive wife, the beautiful home, the perfect backdrop for your success. You didn't love the person because you never knew her. And when she stopped being a perfect reflection of you, you threw her away. He flinched, the accusation hitting its mark. For the first time, she saw a flicker of genuine remorse in his eyes, not for losing the money, but for the profound moral failure he was only now beginning to comprehend. "I'm sorry, Dora," he said, using her old name like an incantation. "I appreciate that," she said. "But that woman, the one you're apologizing to, she doesn't exist anymore. You destroyed her. And in a way, I should thank you for that. Because from her ashes, Theodora Sterling was able to rise." She opened a drawer and slid a single envelope across the desk. "This is from my personal account. Our lawyers have handled the division of assets, but this is separate. It's enough for you to start over, somewhere else. A clean break. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't pity. It was severance. A final, clean cut from her life. It was a gesture of strength, not charity." He looked at the envelope, then back at her, his eyes filled with the devastating understanding of all that he had lost. It wasn't just the money, the status, or the heiress. He had lost a partner he had never truly valued, and in doing so, he had lost himself. He picked up the envelope, gave a single, broken nod, and walked out of her office and out of her life, for good. 1 year later, the Denver skyline looked different to Theodora. It was no longer just a view, it was a responsibility. As CEO of Sterling Price, she had proven to be a thoughtful and innovative leader, steering the company toward sustainable energy and ethical investments, earning the deep respect of her board and the industry. The boardroom, however, was not where she found her greatest purpose. Today, she stood on a small stage in a beautifully restored historic building in the 5 Points neighborhood. The plaque by the door read, "The Eleanor Sterling Center for Women." It was the charitable foundation she had established in her mother's name, a place dedicated to helping women in crisis, women escaping abusive relationships, women facing unplanned pregnancies, women who, like her mother and like her, had found themselves utterly alone. Raoul Aarons was in the front row, his gaze warm and proud. Their relationship had blossomed slowly, organically, from a foundation of mutual respect into a deep, quiet love. He was her partner in every sense of the word, a man who celebrated her strength rather than being intimidated by it. He wasn't a savior. He was an equal. In a carrier strapped to her chest, her 6-month-old daughter, Eleanor, gurgled softly. She was a beautiful baby, with Marcus Sterling's piercing blue eyes, and Theodora's own quiet, observant nature. She was a symbol, not of a painful past, but of a future built on purpose and resilience. Theodora stepped to the podium, looking out at the faces of the staff, volunteers, and the first women the center was helping. "My mother's story was one of silence," she began, her voice clear and strong. She was a woman of incredible spirit, who was forced to make an impossible choice in a world that left her with none. This center is dedicated to ensuring that no woman has to face her crisis in silence. It is a place for second chances, a place to find your voice, and a place to build a new foundation. Her eyes found Raoul's, and then she looked down at the tiny, perfect face of her daughter. The emptiness she had once felt was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace and purpose. She hadn't just inherited a fortune. She had inherited a legacy of strength she never knew she possessed. She had been betrayed, broken, and left with nothing. But from that devastation, she had built a new life. not of her grandfather's design or her husband's, but entirely her own. She was no longer a victim of her story. She was its author. Theodora's journey from a silent, shattered wife to a powerful, compassionate leader reminds us that our greatest strength is often forged in our deepest pain. She didn't just find wealth. She found her voice, her purpose, and the courage to rewrite her own future. Her story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the quiet power that lies within those the world so often underestimates. If this story of betrayal, transformation, and ultimate redemption resonated with you, please like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful, real-life stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul. Thank you for watching. In the hushed, velvet-draped dining room of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, a deal worth $10 billion was about to be destroyed by a single, misunderstood word. The air, usually thick with the scent of truffle oil and quiet success, was now crackling with the fury of one of the world's richest men. Henry Sterling, a titan of technology, was watching his empire teeter on the brink of collapse. His Japanese partners were silent, their faces impassive masks of offense. Nobody spoke their language. Nobody could fix it. The billionaire was fuming, his voice a low growl of impending doom, and then from the shadows the waitress replied. The Gilded Compass wasn't just a restaurant. It was a statement. Perched 70 floors above Columbus Circle, its panoramic windows framed Central Park like a living masterpiece. The clientele was a curated collection of old money, new tech, and quiet power. The staff moved with the silent, rehearsed grace of ballet dancers, their purpose to be invisible yet omniscient. Among them, Chloe Reed was an anomaly. To the casual observer, she was just another part of the impeccable service. Slender with quiet grey eyes and brown hair, pulled back in a severe regulation bun, she projected an aura of unassuming efficiency. She was 24, but her weary, watchful expression made her seem older. Most of her colleagues were aspiring actors or artists waiting tables to fund their dreams. Chloe was just waiting. She never spoke of a past, and her plans for the future were a conversational black hole. She simply did her job with a precision that bordered on obsessive. Her movements economical, her mind seemingly a universe away. Her colleagues whispered. They speculated she was in witness protection, or perhaps the disowned heiress of some forgotten dynasty. The truth was far more mundane, and in its own way, more painful. Chloe was hiding in plain sight, using the anonymity of a service uniform as a shield against a life she had sprinted away from 3 years ago. A life of suffocating expectations of gilded cages in a different part of the world. Here, as a waitress, she was nobody. And nobody was exactly who she needed to be. Tonight, the tension in the Gilded Compass was unusually sharp. Table 12. The Prime Minister of Tables, with its unparalleled view of the park, was occupied by Henry Sterling. Sterling wasn't just wealthy. He was a force of nature. The founder and CEO of Aura Tech, he had clawed his way to the top of the tech world with a combination of genius ruthlessness and a volcanic temper. He was a man who didn't request, he demanded. He didn't ask, he commanded. The world bent to his will. Tonight, however, his will was being tested. Across the table from him sat 3 men from Yamato Corporation, the Japanese electronics giant. The leader was Mr. Thorntonard, Tanaka Kenji, an elderly, impeccably dressed man whose quiet demeanor and soft-spoken words held more weight than Sterling's loudest bellow. This wasn't just a dinner. It was the final delicate step in a negotiation that would define Auratech's future. A $10 billion merger that would solidify Sterling's legacy or shatter it. Chloe was assigned to the section, but not the table itself. The manager, a perpetually stressed but decent man named Robert Mayfield, had assigned his most senior waiter, a Frenchman named Luke, to the task. Chloe's job was to be a ghost, ensuring water glasses were filled from a distance, that Luke had everything he needed, and to remain utterly invisible. From her vantage point by the service station, she watched the scene unfold like a slow-motion car crash. She saw Sterling's forced, toothy smile, the way his fingers drummed a frantic, impatient rhythm on the tablecloth. She saw his two VPs, a man and a woman in their 30s, looking pale and terrified. And she saw the Japanese delegation. They were a portrait of serene control, their politeness a shield. Sterling's brash American charm couldn't seem to penetrate. They had a translator, a young, eager man from Sterling's own company, but something was already wrong. Chloe could feel it in the air, a subtle dissonance in the rhythm of the conversation. The pauses were too long. The bows were a fraction too stiff. Mr. Tanaka spoke, his voice a low, melodic murmur. The translator listened, nodding vigorously, then turned to Sterling. Mr. Tanaka expresses his admiration for the view, Mr. Sterling. He says it is a testament to your company's high aspirations. Sterling beamed, clapping his hands together. Excellent. Tell him the only thing better than the view is the future our companies will build together. The translator relayed the message. Mr. Tanaka smiled faintly, a brief, polite flicker of the lips that didn't reach his eyes. Chloe, who had spent 18 years of her life immersed in the intricate dance of Japanese culture, recognized that smile. It was not a smile of agreement. It was a smile of polite endurance. She refilled a water glass at an adjacent table. Her ears tuned to the conversation at table 12. She couldn't hear the Japanese, only the English translations, but she could read the room. And the room was telling her that Henry Sterling, a man who could bend markets to his will, was failing. He was trying to conquer when he should have been trying to connect. He was loud when the moment called for quiet. He was treating this delicate, honor-bound negotiation like a hostile takeover, and the ice beneath his feet was growing thinner by the second. Chloe felt a familiar, unwelcome knot tighten in her stomach. It was the feeling of watching a powerful man make a fool of himself, a feeling she had spent the last 3 years trying to forget. She turned her back, focusing on polishing a wine glass until it gleamed, hoping to retreat back into the comfortable anonymity of her role. But she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that the night was far from over. The first visible crack appeared with the appetizers. Luke, the veteran waiter, presented the amuse-bouche with a flourish. Tonight, from Chef Antoine, we have a sea urchin panna cotta with a dashi foam and Kaluga caviar, he announced, his French accent lending an extra layer of gravitas to the dish. Sterling nodded enthusiastically. The best in the city, only the best for my esteemed guests. Mr. Tanaka looked at the small, elegant dish. He said something to his translator in a quiet, inquisitive tone. The young translator's brow furrowed. He listened, asked for clarification, then turned to Sterling, his confidence visibly faltering. Mr. Sterling, Mr. Tanaka is asking about the provenance of the uni. Sterling waved a dismissive hand. Provenance? It's from the chef, the best chef. Tell him it's from the ocean, where else? He chuckled. The VPs forced a laugh. The translator, looking miserable, attempted to relay this non-answer. Chloe watched Mr. Tanaka's face. His expression didn't change, but his posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. To Sterling, it was a simple question about food. To Mr. Tanaka, it was a question about respect for ingredients, about detail, about sincerity. A top-tier Japanese chef would know the exact prefecture, perhaps even the specific diver who procured the sea urchin. Sterling's glib response was not just unhelpful. It was an insult to the philosophy of the question itself. Chloe could almost hear the unspoken subtext. If you do not care where the smallest ingredient on your table comes from, how can I trust you with the intricate details of a multi-billion-dollar technology merger? The meal continued a parade of exquisite dishes, each one a potential minefield. Robert, the manager, hovered nearby. His face, a mask of professional calm that barely concealed his rising panic. He caught Chloe's eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a silent acknowledgement that things were going poorly. The conversation had stalled. Sterling, sensing the growing chasm, began to overcompensate. He talked louder, gestured more broadly, and started telling a long, rambling story about a yachting trip in the Caribbean. It was meant to be a display of wealth and power, a way to impress them with his lifestyle. But to the reserved Japanese executives, it came across as boorish and self-aggrandizing. They listened with unwavering politeness, their silence a deepening abyss into which Sterling's monologue echoed and died. Then came the main course, a beautifully seared cut of A5 Wagyu beef. "Now this," Sterling boomed, "is something you'll appreciate, the finest Japanese beef right here in New York." Mr. Tanaka examined the perfectly marbled steak. He spoke to his translator again, a longer sentence this time, his tone still level but with a new, sharper edge. The translator swallowed hard. "Mr. Sterling," the young man began, his voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Tanaka asks, he understands this is from the Kagoshima prefecture. He is asking if you can confirm it is not from a farm in the vicinity of the Sakurajima volcano." Sterling stared, utterly baffled. "The what?" "The volcano. What in God's name does a volcano have to do with the steak?" The translator, now sweating under the pressure, tried to explain. "Sir, I believe it's a concern about the soil, the volcanic ash. For him, it is a matter of purity of the flavor profile. It is a very specific preference." "Specific? It's insane." Sterling snapped, his voice rising. He turned to Luke. "Is this volcano-free beef or what?" Luke, the French waiter, looked completely lost. "Monsieur, it is A5 Wagyu, the highest grade. That is all the information I have." Robert Mayfield, the manager, swooped in. His smile stretched painfully thin. "Gentlemen, I can assure you our purveyor sources only the absolute finest cuts. Let me go and check the certification for you immediately." As Robert scurried away, Sterling's frustration finally boiled over. He gestured angrily at his own translator. "This is your fault. I'm paying you a fortune to make this smooth. Why can't you handle a simple question?" "Sir, it's not a simple question," the translator stammered. "It's a matter of extreme cultural nuance. The way he asked. It's a test. A test. I'm Henry Sterling. I don't get tested by my dinner guests." He hissed, his voice low, but vibrating with rage. Across the table, Mr. Tanaka and his two colleagues had placed their chopsticks down. They weren't speaking. They were simply watching, observing the meltdown. Their faces were blank, but their judgment was clear. The deal wasn't just stalling. It was actively dying right there on the pristine white tablecloth. From her station, Chloe felt a cold dread creep up her spine. She knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about the beef. It was about omotenashi, the Japanese concept of wholehearted, anticipatory hospitality. It was about showing that you had considered every possible need of your guest before they even realized it themselves. Sterling hadn't just failed to anticipate their needs. He was openly mocking them as unreasonable. In the silent, brutal calculus of Japanese business etiquette, he had just committed an unforgivable sin. He had caused his guests to lose face by making their concerns seem trivial. Robert returned his face ashen. "Mr. Sterling, I have the paperwork. The farm is indeed 70 kilometers from Sakurajima. However, the certificate is in Japanese." It was the final straw. Sterling slammed his fist on the table, not hard enough to knock anything over, but with enough force to make every head in the hushed restaurant turn. The sound was like a gunshot in a library. "Useless!" He snarled, his furious gaze sweeping past Robert, past Luke, past his own terrified team. "I'm surrounded by useless people. This is the best restaurant in New York City. And nobody here has the basic competence to handle one simple thing. Is there anyone in this entire $1 million establishment who speaks Japanese?" The question hung in the air, a raw, desperate challenge. The silence that followed was absolute and damning. Luke looked at the floor. Robert's mouth opened and closed with no sound. The translator seemed to shrink in his chair. And from the shadows, Chloe Reed took one involuntary step forward. Henry Sterling's outburst had shattered the carefully constructed illusion of the gilded compass. The low hum of conversation at other tables died away, replaced by a tense, voyeuristic silence. Diners peeked over their wine glasses, their expressions a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Sterling's face was a mask of thunderous rage, his complexion ruddy. He felt control, the one thing he valued above all else, slipping through his fingers. The $10 billion deal was evaporating before his eyes, not because of market fluctuations or a competitor's savvy move, but because of a piece of meat and a volcano. The sheer absurdity of it fueled his fury. "Well," he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, serrated whisper as he glared at Robert Mayfield. "I'm waiting for an answer, Robert. Or is your job title Manager of Incompetence?" Robert, a man who had placated Arab princes and soothed the egos of Hollywood legends, was visibly trembling. "Mr. Sterling, I deeply apologize. It is a failing on our part. We do not have a Japanese-speaking staff member on duty tonight. It was an oversight." "An oversight?" Sterling's laugh was a dry, ugly sound. "An oversight is forgetting to put a lemon twist in a martini. This is a multi-billion-dollar catastrophe. You're fired, Robert. Pack your things. I'll buy this restaurant tomorrow morning just to have the pleasure of firing you again." The threat was real. Everyone knew Sterling had the money and the spite to do it. Robert's face went white. He had a mortgage, 2 kids in college. His entire life was built on his reputation, and Henry Sterling was about to incinerate it in a fit of pique. Across the table, Mr. Tanaka finally moved. He picked up his napkin, folded it precisely, and placed it on the table. It was a clear, unambiguous signal. The dinner was over. His 2 colleagues followed his lead in perfect synchrony. The deal was dead. "Wait!" Sterling barked, a note of pure panic now cutting through his anger. He turned to his own team. "Do something, fix this." His VPs looked at each other in helpless terror. What could they do? The cultural damage was done. The offense was absolute. The corporate translator, seeing the end of his own career, simply stared at his plate defeated. It was in this moment of complete and utter breakdown that Chloe moved. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was an instinct, a reflex honed by years of living in a world where harmony was paramount and public displays of discord were the ultimate shame. She saw Robert's career about to be destroyed over an honest mistake. She saw a lifetime of work on both sides of the table about to be undone by ego and ignorance, and she saw 3 visitors in a foreign country being subjected to a deeply uncomfortable, humiliating experience. She took another step, then another, emerging from the relative obscurity of the service station into the harsh spotlight of table 12. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to stay invisible to protect the fragile anonymity she had so carefully constructed. The name Chloe Reed was a fiction, a flimsy shield. Revealing her fluency in Japanese, especially the rare formal dialect she commanded, was like lighting a flare in the dead of night. It would attract attention. It could lead him to her. But the sight of Robert Mayfield's ashen, terrified face tipped the scales. He had been kind to her, giving her a job when she'd shown up with no references and a haunted look in her eyes. He'd never pried, never asked questions. He had given her a sanctuary, and Sterling was about to burn it to the ground. Her soft-soled shoes made no sound on the plush carpet. She stopped just behind and to the side of Robert, a respectful distance from the table. She bowed. Not a shallow Western-style nod of the head, but a deep, formal bow from the waist, her back straight, her hands clasped in front of her. A bow of profound apology and respect. The entire table, including Sterling, stared at her. Who was this waitress? What was she doing? For a few seconds she said nothing, holding the bow. It was a gesture of deference, a silent request for permission to speak, a way of resetting the disastrous emotional tone of the room. When she finally straightened, her eyes were not on the fuming billionaire, but on Mr. Tanaka. And then she spoke. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but clear, cutting through the thick, tense atmosphere like a silver bell. The words that came out of her mouth were not the hesitant textbook phrases of a student. They were fluid, elegant, and pitched in the impossibly polite and formal register of Kigo, the honorific speech used for addressing those of the highest status. It was a level of Japanese that few non-native speakers ever mastered, redolent of old-world Kyoto, of diplomacy, of deep ingrained respect. She was apologizing, not just for the confusion about the meal, but for the entire atmosphere, for the breach of harmony, for the discomfort of the guests, for the loud voice and aggressive posture of their host. She was taking the blame as a representative of the establishment onto herself. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The moment Chloe began to speak, the universe of the gilded compass tilted on its axis. Henry Sterling's jaw, which had been set in a hard line of fury, went slack with utter shock. His VPs and translator stared as if she had just sprouted wings. Robert Mayfield looked like he was witnessing a miracle, but Chloe's attention was fixed entirely on the 3 Japanese men. She addressed only Mr. Tanaka, but her words and her posture encompassed his companions, acknowledging their presence and their shared experience. In English, what she said was an apology, but in Japanese it was a work of art. She didn't say, "I'm sorry for the confusion." She said, speaking in the flawless, intricate cadence of formal Japanese, "Tanaka-sama, on behalf of our entire unworthy establishment, I must beg your forgiveness for the unforgivable lapse in our hospitality. That we have caused a guest of your esteemed stature even a moment's discomfort has brought a shadow of deep shame upon this house." My master's ignorance is a reflection of my own poor training, for which I humbly apologize." The words were a masterclass in cultural deflection and honor. She called Mr. Tanaka by the highest honorific, Sama. She referred to the restaurant as unworthy. She subtly reframed Sterling's volcanic rage, not as malice, but as the ignorance of a master, and then incredibly took the blame for his ignorance upon herself as a humble servant. In one short, breathtakingly elegant statement, she had absorbed the entirety of Sterling's offense, reframed it as a failing of the restaurant's service, and offered a path for Mr. Tanaka to accept the apology without further embarrassing his host. She had given everyone in the room an escape route. Mr. Tanaka's eyebrows, which had been knitted in a mask of stern disapproval, rose a fraction of an inch. It was the first genuine, unscripted expression he had shown all evening. He looked at this young waitress, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw not a servant, but a person of unexpected depth. He responded his own Japanese formal, but now tinged with curiosity. "You speak the language of my home with surprising grace," he said. "It is a rare skill to find in this country." Chloe bowed her head slightly. "You are too kind, Tanaka-sama. I was fortunate to have spent some years in your beautiful country. It is a land that values subtlety, a lesson my employer has yet to master, for which again I ask for your gracious understanding." Again, the brilliant subtlety. She complimented his country while simultaneously, and with the utmost politeness, pointing out the core of the problem, Sterling's lack of subtlety, while framing it as a forgivable, almost charming American flaw. Sterling, who understood none of the words, but could read the dramatic shift in the room's atmosphere, was mesmerized. The rage had drained from his face, replaced by a stunned, disbelieving awe. He watched this waitress, an employee he wouldn't have recognized 2 minutes earlier, single-handedly diffuse a situation that his entire high-paid team had made infinitely worse. "Mr. Wall." Tanaka then gestured towards the certificate of origin for the beef that Robert was still clutching like a holy relic. "The matter of the steak," he said in Japanese. "It was perhaps a foolish question." "Not at all, Tanaka-sama," Chloe replied instantly, switching to a tone of profound earnestness. "A discerning palate that can distinguish the influence of a mountain soil on the flavor of beef is a sign of a true epicure. It speaks of a deep connection to the land and its gifts. We were unprepared for such expertise, and that is our failure. Allow me." She took the certificate from Robert's nerveless fingers. Her eyes scanned the complex Japanese characters of the document. After a moment, she looked up. "The document confirms that the ranch is in the Kirishima Range, well outside the primary ashfall zone of Sakurajima. The cattle's diet is supplemented with a special blend of rice straw and barley, ensuring a clean, pure flavor. The rancher's name is Ito, a family that has raised this specific bloodline of cattle for 3 generations. They are known for their humane practices and the sweetness of the beef's fat." She relayed this information not as a dry list of facts, but as if she were telling a story, imbuing the details with a sense of reverence. She hadn't just translated the document. She had conveyed its soul. One of Mr. Tanaka's younger colleagues let out a small, involuntary gasp of admiration. Mr. Tanaka himself allowed a small, genuine smile to grace his lips. This was more than he had asked for. This was omotenashi. He picked up his chopsticks. "In that case," he said, his voice now warm, "it would be a shame to let such a fine meal grow cold." His colleagues immediately followed suit. The crisis was over. The silent, tense standoff had been broken. The dinner and the $10 billion deal that depended on it was back on. Henry Sterling stared at Chloe, his mind reeling. He had built an empire on identifying and acquiring assets of immense value. And he had the sudden, dizzying realization that the most valuable asset in this entire 70-story building was not the real estate, not the art on the walls, and certainly not himself. It was the quiet, unassuming waitress who was now discreetly motioning for Luke to serve the main course as if she hadn't just performed corporate open-heart surgery. What followed was one of the most surreal hours of Henry Sterling's life. Chloe did not simply retreat back to her station. With a nod from a shell-shocked Robert, she assumed a new unspoken role at the table. She became the bridge. She stood a few paces back, a phantom presence stepping forward only when needed. She didn't replace Sterling's corporate translator. That would have been a grave insult to the young man, however out of his depth he was. Instead, she supplemented him. When a complex cultural idea was presented, and the translator would provide a literal word-for-word interpretation, Chloe would wait a beat, and then, if necessary, offer a quiet clarification to Sterling's VPs. What Mr. Tanaka is referring to as the sound of the cicada, she explained in a near whisper after one particularly poetic exchange, is a metaphor for appreciating transient beauty. He's not talking about insects. He's comparing the short-term profit model of many Western companies with the Japanese philosophy of building a business that can endure for 100 years. Suddenly, a conversation that had seemed like opaque, mystical nonsense became a sharp business insight. Sterling's team began to understand. They stopped trying to impress and started to listen. Chloe's true genius, however, was in how she translated Sterling to the Japanese. She became his cultural filter. When Sterling, in his typical blunt fashion, said, "Our Q4 projections are aggressive and will crush the competition," Chloe would perform a subtle act of linguistic alchemy. She would turn to Mr. Tanaka and say in her serene, formal Japanese, "Sterling-sama has immense confidence in the market's positive reception of our shared venture. He envisions a future where our combined strength creates a new standard of excellence, encouraging our competitors to improve their own offerings for the benefit of all." She transformed his combative zero-sum declarations into visions of shared prosperity and mutual respect. She wasn't lying. She was translating his intent, not his words. She was building a bridge between a mindset focused on victory and one focused on harmony. Mr. Tanaka was captivated. He began directing more of his conversation towards Chloe, engaging her in discussions about Japanese art, about the seasonal changes in Central Park, about the philosophy of ceramics. He was no longer just assessing a business partner. He was exploring the character of his host's establishment, and by extension, his host. Through Chloe Sterling, a man who had been a boorish caricature just an hour before was being repainted as a powerful but unpolished leader who had the wisdom to surround himself with people of grace and intelligence. Chloe handled it all with an effortless poise that was both astonishing and, for her, terrifying. With every perfectly chosen phrase, every correctly interpreted nuance, she felt the walls of her anonymity crumbling. This was the world she had run from. This was the language of her gilded childhood in the Tokyo diplomatic quarter, a world of high-stakes conversations where a misplaced word could cause an international incident. She had been trained in this art by tutors by her mother, by the very air she breathed for 18 years. She was good at it because it was a part of who she was, a part she had tried to amputate. The dessert course arrived, and the atmosphere was now not just cordial, but genuinely warm. Mr. Tanaka was smiling, telling a story about his grandson. Sterling, humbled into a rare state of listening, was actually laughing along his VPs, looking on in relieved disbelief. As the meal concluded, Mr. Tanaka stood. He bowed first to Sterling, a standard polite bow. Then he turned to Chloe. He gave her a bow of identical depth and sincerity. "The meal was excellent," he said, allowing Chloe to translate. "But the hospitality was transcendent. It is a rare thing to find a soul that understands the heart of a culture, not just its language. You have done your house a great honor tonight." He then turned back to Sterling. "We will sign the preliminary agreement tomorrow at 9 a.m. in your office. My team and I are very much looking forward to a long and prosperous partnership with Auratech." The words hung in the air, golden and perfect. The deal was done. $10 billion, sealed not by lawyers and spreadsheets, but by the quiet grace of a waitress. As the Japanese delegation was escorted to their cars by the ecstatic VPs, Henry Sterling remained at the table. The restaurant was emptying out the staff, beginning their quiet end-of-night routines. Sterling didn't move. He just watched Chloe, who had silently retreated and was now clearing glasses from an adjacent table. Her movements as precise and unassuming as they had been at the start of the night. It was as if the past hour had been a dream. But Sterling knew it wasn't. He waited until she was alone in the section. Then he rose from his chair and walked towards her. His expression was no longer angry or awed or even relieved. It was the look he got when he had identified a target for acquisition. "Chloe Reed," he said, his voice low and serious. "You and I need to have a conversation." The chaotic energy of the dinner service had bled away, leaving behind the tired, methodical calm of closing time. The gilded compass was exhaling. The low murmur of the last remaining patrons was a ghost of the earlier buzz, and the clinking of cutlery being sorted in the distant kitchen was a gentle rhythmic punctuation to the quiet. Chloe moved through this landscape of pristine debris, her body on autopilot. She collected salt and pepper shakers, wiped down the dark wood of empty tables, and stacked bread plates onto her tray. Each mundane task was a small anchor, keeping her tethered to the simple reality of Chloe Reed the waitress, while her mind reeled in the turbulent aftermath of what she had done. She could feel Henry Sterling's eyes on her. It was a palpable sensation, like the heat of a spotlight. He hadn't left with his jubilant team. He remained at the now cleared table 12, a solitary, powerful figure silhouetted against the glittering tapestry of the city. He wasn't looking at the view. He was watching her. She knew the confrontation was inevitable, and with every passing second, the dread coiled tighter in her stomach. The adrenaline that had sharpened her wits and loosened her tongue had long since dissipated, leaving behind the cold, familiar residue of fear. She had spent 3 years building a fortress of anonymity, brick by boring brick. A quiet life, a forgettable job, a name that wasn't her own. Tonight, to save a kind man's job and prevent a spectacular cultural implosion, she had stepped out from behind the battlements and launched a flare high into the night sky. And now, the most powerful man she had ever encountered was walking deliberately toward that light, his footsteps unnervingly silent on the thick carpet. Chloe finished arranging the plates on her tray, the weight of the porcelain a flimsy shield. She forced herself to breathe, to keep her hands from trembling. "You are Chloe Reed," she told herself, a desperate mantra. "You are no one. He can't see what isn't there." "Leave that," he said. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a resonant authority that cut through the room's ambient noise. It was a voice accustomed to absolute, unquestioning obedience. Chloe froze her back still to him. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, then turned, schooling her features into a mask of polite, professional deference. Sir. Sterling stopped a few feet away, his intense blue eyes scanning her as if she were a complex schematic he was trying to decipher. The raw fury from earlier was gone, replaced by a charged, analytical curiosity that she found far more unnerving. "I've seen a lot of things in my 52 years," he began, his voice a low, intense hum. "I've seen code writers who can think in 5 languages. I've seen physicists who can sketch out the universe on a napkin. But I have never in my entire life seen anything like what you did back there." He gestured vaguely toward the table. "You didn't just translate words. You conducted a symphony of etiquette. You took a train wreck and transformed it into a diplomatic triumph. My board of directors pays a crisis management firm $3 million a year, and their best advice would have been to run. You, on the other hand, you fixed it." He took a step closer. "So I'm going to ask you again, and this time I want a real answer. Who are you?" The question hung in the air between them. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. The truth was a loaded weapon, and she would not hand it to him. "My name is Chloe Reed, Mr. Sterling. I'm a waitress." A flicker of impatience crossed his face. "Stop it. Don't insult my intelligence, and more importantly, don't insult your own. Your Japanese was more than fluent. It was aristocratic. Your understanding of their culture was academic. A person doesn't acquire that level of skill waiting tables. So what is it? Ex-diplomat's kid. A runaway academic. Corporate espionage." He had a ghost of a smile on his lips at the last one, but his eyes were deadly serious. "I was fortunate to have a good education and lived abroad when I was younger," Chloe said, the carefully constructed half-truth feeling flimsy and transparent under his dissecting gaze. "That's all." He stared at her for a long moment, the silence stretching. He knew she was lying, and she knew that he knew. It was a silent, mutual acknowledgement that brought a new level of tension to the exchange. He sighed a gust of frustrated air and abruptly changed his approach. "Fine," he said, waving a hand as if to dismiss her entire defense. "Don't tell me. I don't care about your past. Your future is what interests me." He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket, producing a slim platinum fountain pen and a checkbook bound in dark leather. The quiet snick of the pen cap coming off was louder than a gunshot in the hushed room. "Whatever you're doing here, it's over," he stated, not as an offer, but as a declaration of fact. "This is not your life anymore." He began to write his movements sharp and decisive. "I'm writing you a check for $100,000. Think of it as an inconvenience fee for having to find a new apartment and quit your job. It's a signing bonus." He tore the check from the book with a precise tearing sound and held it out. Chloe stared at the slip of paper. The amount was dizzying. It represented a safety she couldn't even fathom, the ability to disappear again, to go anywhere, to build a better, stronger fortress. But she knew with absolute certainty that it was not a key to freedom. It was the first link in a very beautiful, very expensive chain. She made no move to take it. Sterling's eyes narrowed slightly at her stillness. "That's your appetizer," he continued, undeterred. "The main course is your role. You'll be my senior advisor for global strategy. It's a new position I just created. You'll answer directly to me. Your base salary will be $750,000. Corporate apartment in the Auratech Tower, the one with the view that makes this place look like a basement. A car and driver. Unlimited expense account. Your job will be to be the voice in my ear, the brain in my head, for every dealing we have in Asia, starting with the Yamato merger. You will ensure I never make a fool of myself like that again. You will make us unstoppable." He was painting a picture of a life she had once known, a life of immense privilege, power, and visibility. A life that had nearly destroyed her. The thought of stepping back into that world, even a different version of it, sent a wave of panic through her so potent it was almost nauseating. She could almost feel the cold, possessive hand of her stepfather on her shoulder. She finally met his gaze, her own grey eyes clear and unwavering. "Mr. Sterling, that is the most generous offer I could ever imagine. I am truly grateful." Her voice was soft, but the core of it was steel. "But I have to decline." If she had slapped him, the effect would have been less dramatic. Henry Sterling was a man who moved markets, toppled competitors, and bent reality to his will. The word no was not a part of his operational vocabulary, especially not from someone he considered himself to be rescuing from obscurity. For a moment, he was utterly silent, his mind rebooting to process the alien concept. "Decline." He finally repeated the word, tasting strange in his mouth. "What do you mean you decline? Is this a negotiation? You want 1,000,000? Done. 1,000,005. Name the number. I will not be outbid for talent like yours." "It's not about the money, sir." She said the words, feeling achingly inadequate to explain the chasm between his offer and her reality. "Then what in God's name is it about?" he demanded, his voice rising with incredulous frustration. "I am offering you the world on a silver platter, a chance to use a gift that 1 in 100 million people possesses. You want to stay here, spilling wine on tourists and clearing away half-eaten food for the rest of your life. That's your grand ambition." Every word was a jab designed to make her feel small, to make her choice seem insane. And a part of her, the logical part, screamed that he was right. But the deeper part, the part that remembered suffocating fear and the desperate flight in the middle of the night, knew he was fatally wrong. "I have my reasons," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I prefer a simple life. The world you're describing, the pressure, the constant visibility, it's not for me. I am happy here." The lie was blatant, but she delivered it with such finality that Sterling, for the first time, paused his assault. He looked at her, truly looked past the uniform and the polite refusal. He saw the tension in her jaw, the rigid control in her posture, the subtle way she angled herself toward the exit. And finally, he saw the deep, undeniable flicker of fear in her eyes. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a flight response. His expression shifted from frustration to a profound, calculating intrigue. The puzzle of Chloe Reed had just become infinitely more complex, and therefore infinitely more He lowered the check. "I don't believe you," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Not for a second. You're not happy here. You're hiding. But I won't press you on it. For now." With a decisive click, he retracted the nib of his fountain pen. He turned the check over, and on the blank back he wrote his personal cell phone number. "This is my private line. Not my assistant's, not my office's. Mine." He didn't offer the check to her this time. Instead, he stepped forward and carefully slid it onto her tray, placing it directly beside a half-empty water glass. "The offer stands, every part of it. When you realize that a simple life is no life at all for someone like you call that number, day or night." He looked at her one last time, a long, searching gaze that felt like it was mapping her very soul. "Don't be a fool, Chloe Reed. A person only gets one chance to change their entire destiny. This is yours. Without another word, he turned and strode out of the silent dining room, a king leaving a court that no longer made sense to him. Chloe stood motionless, the immense empty space seeming to press in on her. Her gaze fell to the tray. There it was, a slip of paper bearing a 7-figure salary offer, a $100,000 bonus, and a 10-digit phone number. It was a lifeline. It was a time bomb. And it had her fake name written right on it. The name Henry Sterling would now use to start digging. The flare she had launched was no longer just a light. It was now a beacon, and she knew with a chilling certainty that he would follow it all the way down into the darkness of her past. Henry Sterling did not become a billionaire by accepting things he didn't understand. Chloe Reed's refusal was a puzzle, and Sterling's mind was engineered to solve puzzles, whether they were in lines of code or in the perplexing motivations of human beings. For 2 days he left the check and the offer hanging in the air, expecting a call. None came. On the 3rd day, his patience, a notoriously finite resource, ran out. He didn't delegate the task. This was personal. He sat in his minimalist penthouse office, the city lights spread beneath him like a carpet of scattered diamonds, and he initiated a search for Chloe Reed. He engaged the best corporate security and private investigation firm money could buy, a discreet outfit on Park Avenue, run by a former MI6 officer. The initial results were frustratingly thin. Chloe Reed, aged 24, had a social security number issued just 3 years ago. Her employment history began and ended with the Gilded Compass. She had a small, bare-bones apartment in Queens. No credit history beyond a single, low-limit credit card paid on time. No social media presence. No family listed. No past. She was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost who had materialized in New York City 36 months ago. This is a clean identity. The investigator, a crisp Englishman named David Chenoweth, reported over a secure line. Professionally done, but not government level. It's meant to withstand a cursory background check, not a deep dive by someone like you, Mr. Sterling. So dive deeper, Sterling commanded. Fingerprints from her employment application. Facial recognition against every database you can access. I want to know who she was before she became a waitress.
That is 7 centimeters.
The resources of a multi-billionaire are vast. They bypassed legal channels using back doors into international databases. For a week, they found nothing. It was as if she had been born on the day she applied for her Social Security card. Then they got a hit. A partial facial recognition match flagged from a guest list database at a diplomatic function in Tokyo 5 years prior. The photo was of a younger woman, her hair styled differently, wearing a formal silk gown. The name on the list was not Chloe Reed. It was Catherine Ashford. With a name, the floodgates opened. Catherine Ashford was the stepdaughter of U.S. Senator Robert Davenport, a powerful, charismatic politician with a frighteningly clean public image and rumored ties to ruthless corporate lobbyists. Davenport had served as a trade liaison in Japan for several years. His wife, Catherine's mother, had passed away when Catherine was a teenager. Catherine, a brilliant student of language and culture, had essentially become her stepfather's hostess and unofficial translator at countless functions. Then 3 years ago, she had vanished. The official story fed to the society pages was that she had chosen to pursue her art studies at a private secluded institution in Europe to grieve her mother's passing away from the public eye. But Chenoweth's team found something else. They found a pattern of control. They found sealed university records, a restraining order filed by Catherine against a family associate that was mysteriously withdrawn a week later. They found whispers from former household staff about Senator Davenport's possessive, almost obsessive behavior towards his stepdaughter after his wife's death, his insistence on controlling every aspect of her life. Sterling sat at his desk, reading the encrypted report, and for the first time he understood. Chloe. Catherine wasn't just hiding. She was running. Her refusal of his offer wasn't an act of pride. It was an act of self-preservation. A high-profile job as his personal liaison would have put her directly in the spotlight, a spotlight her powerful and controlling stepfather would undoubtedly see. He felt a cold knot of something unfamiliar in his gut. It was a mix of anger at the senator and a grudging respect for the woman who had traded a life of privilege for anonymous freedom. He had seen her as an asset to be acquired. Now he saw her as a person in a cage. That evening he didn't call. He went to her apartment building in Queens. He didn't take his security detail. He waited across the street in an unremarkable town car as she got off the subway looking small and tired in a simple coat a world away from the commanding presence she'd had in the restaurant. He watched her check over her shoulder before entering her building, a habitual gesture of someone who never feels truly safe. He gave her 10 minutes, then he went to her door and knocked. She opened it on a chain, her eyes wide with alarm when she saw him. "Mr. Sterling, how did you find me?" "I'm a man who solves puzzles," he said quietly, his tone devoid of its usual arrogance. "May I come in?" "Catherine?" The use of her real name made her flinch as if he'd struck her. She stared at him, her mind racing a cornered animal, deciding whether to fight or flee. She saw something new in his eyes, not acquisitiveness, but a kind of grim understanding. Slowly she closed the door and slid the chain off. Her apartment was tiny, neat, and impersonal. There were no photographs, no mementos. It was the home of someone who didn't plan to stay. "My stepfather," she began, her voice trembling. "Is a problem," Sterling finished for her. "I know. I'm not here to expose you. I'm here to change the deal." He remained standing, giving her space. "The offer of $750,000 a year, the apartment, the car, it's all off the table. It was the wrong offer. It was loud. It was public. It was everything you don't want." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Here is the new deal. I am creating a new unlisted subsidiary of Aura Tech, a cultural consultancy division with a staff of 1. You. You will work from anywhere you choose. Your name will not be on any masthead. You will not attend public meetings. Your official title will be Research Analyst for a non-existent department." He looked her straight in the eye. "Your job will be to be my eyes and ears on all matters of international protocol, starting with Japan. You will prep my team. You will review my correspondence. You will be my secret weapon, the ghost in my machine. Your salary will be $1 million a year, paid through a discreet trust that will be impossible to trace back to me or to you. And my security firm, the one that found you, will now be dedicated to making sure no one else ever does. They will create a digital fortress around your new identity, and they will keep a very close, very quiet watch on Senator Davenport." Catherine stared at him, speechless. He wasn't offering her a job. He was offering her a shield. He was offering her protection, anonymity, and the resources to stay free, all while using the skills she had tried to bury. He had seen her cage, and instead of trying to buy her, he was offering her a way to reinforce it against the outside world while giving her the freedom to move within it. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Why would you do all this?" Henry Sterling, the ruthless titan of tech, looked around the small, bare apartment and gave an answer of startling honesty. "Because for the first time in 20 years, I was reminded that the most valuable things in this world, talent, integrity, courage, are not things that can be bought. They have to be earned. And because my $10 billion deal is on the line, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let it get screwed up by my own arrogance again. I need you. But I'm offering you a partnership, not a leash." For the first time in 3 years, Catherine Ashford felt a flicker of something she thought she had lost forever hope. She saw a path forward that wasn't about hiding, but about building. She looked at the man before her, a flawed, arrogant, impatient billionaire who had against all odds shown a capacity for understanding and respect. "My friends here," she said, her voice gaining strength. "They call me Chloe." Sterling allowed a small, rare smile. "All right, Chloe. Do we have a deal?" She took a deep breath, and for the first time, it didn't feel like she was just surviving. It felt like she was beginning. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," she said. "We have a deal." And so the waitress who spoke perfect Japanese didn't just get a job. She reclaimed her life. Her story isn't just about a lucky break. It's a powerful reminder that our greatest strengths are often forged in the very pasts we try to escape. It proves that true value isn't always loud and on display. Sometimes it's the quiet voice in the room that speaks with the most authority. Henry Sterling learned that respect is a greater currency than money, and Chloe learned that you can't hide from your talents forever. Sometimes the only way to be truly safe is to embrace the full force of who you are. What do you think? Was Sterling's transformation believable? What would you have done in Chloe's position? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of hidden strength and unexpected alliances resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life stories that will make you think.